there will be a war between India and China. It could happen in the Himalayas, it could happen in the seas, it could happen in both the places. I do not know, but a war is coming. There has been a lot of bullying which China does, especially with countries like Philippines and Japan. Japan and the Philippines have now signed something called the Reciprocal Access Agreement, the RAA. Japan is the only country in the world that has suffered nuclear war. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, let's not forget that. But today, they feel so threatened by China. China is like the uncouth person. Many of us know such people. Uncouth people who have suddenly come across wealth. Just imagine a fully armed Filipino military. Fully armed. This is exactly what the Chinese did in Galwan, and they're doing it all over again in the South China Sea. For the Philippines and Japan, this is now, ladies and gentlemen, a war for survival. Jan friends, I'm Major Gaurav Arya and you're watching the Chanakya Dialogues English. Friends, you know that China has a territorial claim on every single country with which China has borders. Except for maybe Pakistan, because Pakistan voluntarily gave a huge part of the territory that it had illegally occupied from India. It gifted the territory to China. More of that on some other day. But today, what I'm trying to say is that there has been a lot of bullying which China does, especially with countries like Philippines and Japan. You know, there have been recent clashes between the coast guards of China and Philippines. The Chinese have deliberately started boarding Filipino vessels and beating up the crew and stealing their guns, etc. This is all an effort to intimidate the Filipinos. Now, the Filipinos are not getting intimidated, and the Filipinos have said that now we want to do something about it because enough is enough. You're all aware that India supplied the BrahMos missile platforms to the Philippines, and I think India should get into supplying more weapon platforms like the Tejas, the Prachand helicopter, maybe the Pinaka, you know, and other things that India is making. India should supply to the Philippines. Now, what the Philippines have done is that Japan and the Philippines have now signed something called the Reciprocal Access Agreement, the RAA. And what is the Reciprocal Access Agreement? It is essentially that we will both allow, Philippines and Japan will both allow military bases on each other's soil. Now, this is what they are saying. They're saying that we can deploy. When I say bases, I don't mean fixed bases. I'm saying that in case of a war, what they're going to do is, I use the word bases lightly here, but allowing them to deploy their forces on each other's soil. So what happens is that in case of a war, if Japan wants to deploy its forces and use the Filipino soil as a base, and that is where my usage of the word base is coming from. If they want to use Filipino soil as a base, they're welcome to do that. And if the Filipinos want to use Japanese territory as a base for their operations, they're very welcome. The Philippines Defense Minister Gilberto Teodoro and Japanese Yoko Kamikawa, they have signed a deal in a ceremony in Manila. The agreement creates a framework to facilitate military cooperation, such as making entry of foreign personnel and equipment easier for the visiting force. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is this thing about, Japanese use a different set of equipment and the Filipinos are using a different set of equipment, right? And every equipment needs something that it can, plug into. A software talking to a hardware talking to a software, and ease of operations. Weapons are not used in isolation. You can't just have high-tech weapons, place them on a Japanese island and start firing or start using those platforms. Similarly, for the Japanese, they can't go on Filipino soil and just automatically start operating. You need certain ecosystems, environment, and this is something that both the countries are tying up with each other. They're saying personnel and equipment so that it is easier for them to operate on different soil. That is one part of it. Then Tokyo, which hosts the biggest concentration of US forces, has a similar RAA with Australia and Britain. So why does it have an RAA with or RAA deals with Australia and Britain? Because at least Australia, when Australia is concerned, Japan realizes that even Australians have a problem with the Chinese, right? And is negotiating. They're negotiating another deal with France. So Japan, at least after 1945, a largely non-military country. After the surrender, they had almost disbanded their defense forces, and they said that the Japanese defense forces are only going to be used for defending Japan. Now there is another school of thought in Japan, ladies and gentlemen, and this school of thought, some of them slightly more extreme says that we must have nuclear weapons. And this is very strange for the Japanese to say, because Japan is the only country in the world that has suffered nuclear war. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, let's not forget that. Japan is the only country, but today they feel so threatened by China because China has left no stone unturned in trying to threaten everybody else. So the Chinese will come and threaten. They'll sort of fly over their airspace and they will enter their waters and they will try to bully and they'll try to push everybody. This is China. China is like the uncouth person. Many of us know such people. Uncouth people who have suddenly come across wealth and they don't know how to handle it. I'm sure you've seen such people in your life. People who are poor, suddenly they got a lot of money, they became rich overnight, and now they are unable to digest this wealth, and they feel that they can only do justice to their wealth by throwing their weight around and becoming a nuisance. This is exactly what Beijing is doing, and Japan is trying to fight against what Beijing is doing. So my friends, at the South China Sea, Beijing's expansive maritime claims conflict with a number of Southeast Asian nations. Therefore, Japan's military presence in the Philippines could help Manila counter Chinese influence. It is important to note that Japan does not have any claim to the South China Sea, but has a separate maritime dispute with China in the East China Sea. Japan has agreed to provide the Philippines with coastal surveillance radars, the first cooperation project, its official security assistance program that is aimed at helping boost deterrence capability of partner countries. Now, why is Japan doing this? Japan is actually exporting offensive systems or defensive systems. Let's say exports a radar. Now, what good is a radar? I'm saying radar is essentially giving information, right? You put radars, they tell you where the enemy is coming from. I'm talking about aerial threats. But a radar coupled with, right, a surface-to-air missile or with air defense systems is the ideal balance. And I think here is where, because media does not tell us that the Japanese army is actually supplying, or the Japanese government is actually supplying surface-to-air missiles or surface-to-air capability to the Filipinos. But if they are not, we should do it, because we have Trishul, we have Akash, and we should help the Filipinos in doing it. Because you see, if China attacks India, which China will, there is going to be a war between India and China. I've been saying this for a very, very long time, ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to repeat this today. There will be a war between India and China. It could happen in the Himalayas, it could happen in the seas, it could happen in both the places. I do not know, but a war is coming. It's going to happen. And at that time, you need to have friends who are fully armed and who also have serious issues with China. Just imagine a fully armed Filipino military, fully armed, with all the missiles, all the weapons, all the capabilities. Similarly for Taiwan, similarly for Japan or Australia and everybody else. Just coming together in that entire area, hammering China when the time comes. Along the line of actual control, there are hardly any supply chains. I mean, at 18,000, 20,000 feet above sea level, which supply chains do you think there will be? There are hardly anything there. Not a blade of grass grows. So it is easier for them, easier for the Chinese to cause stress along the Himalayas. It's easier for them that way. Right? But then, when you think about other things, why are they not doing anything like this to the Indian Navy in the seas? Because all these navies that they're bullying, these are small-time navies. So yeah, sure, you can bully the Filipinos. You can try and nudge the Japanese a little bit. And you can frown upon the Taiwanese. But can you try and do something against the Indian Navy? A little difficult for the Chinese, even though the Chinese now have 3 aircraft carriers, etc. But, we have 2 very good aircraft carriers with a 3rd on the way. And I don't think the Chinese want to take on the Indian Navy, right, in the seas. They'll find it very difficult. So what do? They do this. They try to cause stress along the Himalayas. They want trade with India to continue. Let us understand, they want trade with India to continue, but they want stress along the line of actual control. Friends, Japan has expressed serious concerns over China's actions at the South China Sea, including the recent incidents that have resulted in damage to Philippine vessels and injured a Filipino sailor. On June 17th, Chinese Coast Guard sailors brandishing swords, including sticks, knives, and an axe, clashed with Philippine naval vessels near a strategic reef in the South China Sea. Does this or does this not remind you of Galwan? Tell me, friends, does this or does this not remind you of Galwan? This is exactly what the Chinese did in Galwan, and they're doing it all over again in the South China Sea. And you know, a Filipino sailor lost a thumb in the incident, which saw the Chinese Coast Guard confiscate or destroy Philippine equipment, including guns, according to the Philippine ministry. After this, Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has said that his country is not in the business of instigating wars, but will not be intimidated by anyone. Latest move by China in the South China Sea. Philippines has claimed that China's monster ship, now I don't know what they're calling the monster ship, but apparently this is a massive ship out of whose belly you have other small ships coming out. So this is how China is bullying, maybe a big holding ship or something like that. And this has anchored in Manila's exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. So this another instance of China bullying the Philippines, because in the exclusive economic zone of a country, you're parking a ship which is a military ship without permission. This is China trying to push the envelope. Meanwhile, the Philippines military has now called on China to return the firearms that its Coast Guard seized from Filipino Navy personnel, and Manila's army also asked Beijing to pay around $1 million in compensation for damaging vessels involved in the last month's resupply mission to the second Thomas Shoal. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's deal with the importance of the South China Sea, a major shipping route. You know, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development estimates that over 21% of global trade, amounting to $3.37 trillion US, transited through these waters in 2016. Rich fishing grounds, more than half of the world's fishing vessels operate in this area. Now you understand why China wants this entire area. China is not willing to compromise. China is not willing to say that, okay, hey, Philippines, you know, maybe you can have a part of this. Maybe we can both share. China doesn't want that. China does not believe in sharing. China will use force, it will use bullying and intimidation tactics to, you know, look down, stare down smaller countries. But with this new RAA being signed between Japan and Philippines, it just proves that when you push a country too much against the wall, a country will react. For the Philippines and Japan, this is now, ladies and gentlemen, a war for survival. I hope you liked this video. And if you did, press the like button, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to press the bell icon. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram, Bharat Mata Ki Jai.